You unlock this benefit with the key of Patreon. Beyond is another dimension. A dimension of thought. A dimension of speculation. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both waffle and substance. Of things and ideas. You've just crossed into the podcast zone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Trekking Through the Twilight Zone. We're going to jump on a train and we're going to be heading to Willoughby, a lovely little place out of the way. And Julian, are you going to join me there in Willoughby?
Oh yes, I'm in Willoughby every night.
Yeah, it seems like a lovely place. Stopping off, obviously, like the what the bloody hell, it's gone from memory. What do they refer to it as? The Huckleberry Finn kind of sort of town. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we're on to the episode A Stop at Willoughby, in which Adman, I forget his name now, under pressure at work. It's all about the push, push, push. And when that pressure gets to him, he starts to fantasize about this wonderfully quaint, sort of old Americana town of Willoughby that may or may not exist. And eventually one night he makes the decision to stay in Willoughby. But what does that do in the real world? So, Julian, what were your thoughts on this episode?
I think that this is inferior to Walking Distance, which was the fifth episode that I think very highly of. But I quite like this episode. And I do remember this episode. It's impossible to not think of Mad Men, which acknowledged some influence from the Twilight Zone. So, and I like the, except he's Garth Williams, the character here, it works in television. I don't think this is as good. It's got a sort of twist ending, which I'm fine with. It's dark. But yeah, I mean, I like this. I like the character. I like the central dynamic. What about you?
Yeah, the same. I actually really like some of the stuff in this episode. You mentioned like Mad Men's one of the first things I wrote in my notes, and a little bit of research actually. This episode is name checked by the showrunner of Mad Men as being one of the influences. Also, it was noted that this is in Rod Serling's top 5 episodes. Personally, so he liked this one as well. But yeah, there's some interesting stuff in this. I like the fact that some of the things it covers. About basically the workplace, about how you can't trust any sod. They're all going to turn on you and take the account somewhere else. Yeah. But more than that this idea of, and it's seen, this has come up a lot, and it's come up in other episodes, of the shrewish wife who, and it's a horrible stereotype that I know was a TV trope for many, many years. But how like she's the one that's sort of like, without me you wouldn't be anything, and he's like, I don't want to be anything. Like you've made me this to facilitate your life. Like I'm out there earning this salary, this income, so that you can be a part of this status club, the Green Club or whatever. These are the social clubs. Like I don't want to do this anymore. And instead of sort of like, because he clearly has like the pressures this job are clearly affecting his mental health, which results in the ending. But his wife's like not willing to support him in any way. She's more like, oh, just shut up and do the job so I can keep doing what I'm doing. And she's vile. That's the point. But this thing again, I understand it and I'm sure it happens, but it feels a bit cliched at this point, even in this series.
Yeah, she's definitely the weakest part of this episode. And if this episode has one thing that just does not work, it's her. And I think you're right. It's just that she is too over the top.
Yeah.
When he talks about Willoughby to her, she just ridicules him. And she says, your big dream in life is to be Huckleberry Finn.
Yeah.
I mean, okay. And when he calls her and basically says, like, I'm quitting today. I'm cracking up. I can't do this anymore. I'm done. Apparently, she is totally unsympathetic. No, there's not an ounce of concern for him in her body. So yeah, that's all pretty excessive, and she definitely is the weakest link in this episode.
But there are certain things I can empathize with. But again, there are certain things in this episode that they're there to form a point, but they don't work on a practical level. Like the moment when he breaks, when he's got the multiple phone calls and he's got his secretary coming in talking to him, at some point I'd have been like, all right, love, shut up. You can see him on the phone. I don't care who needs to see me. I'll be in 5 minutes. Like, but she keeps just saying his name as if like he's not listening. And you're like, you're a terrible secretary. Like acknowledge what he's doing, leave him be, or leave him a note and be like, I'm going to leave you a note. Go see so and so in 5 minutes. Do the phone calls. Leave him be. And there was just things like that. I'm like, yeah, this is just irritating. However, that boss who push, that I sort of can imagine, and especially in a 60s, late 50s, early 60s workplace, this idea of, no, this is what we do. You have to be a man, and it is all about that push. It's all about working the hours and earning this and da. That all felt kind of real and still exists very much today. Unfortunately, this idea of sort of like giving yourself to the job, like you are the job kind of thing. And that sort of like hit home a little bit, to be honest. There was a bit of a biting thing there. I was like, when he snapped and he's like, all right, fatso, and leaves. I was like, woo, we've all been there, mate. We've all been there.
Yeah, I mean, I found myself to get to the scene with the secretary and the phone calls. I thought, I know this guy is basically passive. He really didn't have the ambition. His wife pushed him. But how the hell did this guy reach this level if he can't, not only tell the secretary, you know what, leave me alone for a second, but I kept thinking, tell these people on the phone, I'll get back to you. Like, I've already told you, I'll get back to you. Calm the hell down. Hang up on them.
Yeah.
How do you not, have the guts to do that if you're an executive? Yeah, I mean, the boss is really wonderful. And the sort of like push kind of, masculinity, live to work kind of thing. And of course now, I mean, that does seem realistic, and there are still bosses like that. And now, I identify with, I'm Gen X. I often identify with, Gen Y or Z. And there's this whole transition to like, no, we don't want these miserable jobs. We don't accept that our life is all about work. And when you greet somebody, the first question is, you meet somebody, the first question is, what do you do for an occupation? Well, screw that. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I do really enjoy that boss.
Yeah, he's good. And the guy who plays him has got some great facial cues as well, which he's just good. Going back to this place seems to they get some good character actors in for side roles in this show, and I just think it's worth calling out. We've said about like Mr. Pip in previous episode, and these others. Like, this is another good one. One of the things as well though is I want this idea of Willoughby. We need to get to this thought on Willoughby. Willoughby's this wonderful, picturesque little sort of pre-1900s town. Everyone lives at a slower pace and can enjoy life and all sorts of things. Was this idea of the rat race and this idea of a slow time, was it a thing then in the late 50s, early 60s? Oh, okay.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it's not. I mean, you have the whole. The novel, like The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, right? I mean, this was like basically Madman avant le mot. Like, this was just like, yeah, we all wear these same gray flannel suits and we're just slaves to, the stupid kind of culture. And yeah, I mean, this was something that was a common social critique even in the 50s. Well, it existed anyway. Yeah.
No, it's funny. It's one of those things that hasn't gone away. I mean, I was literally reading an article recently about Japanese work culture. Was it Chinese? I think it was Chinese work culture. It's called the 996, which is that you work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. And it's unofficial. Like the Chinese government are like, no, we don't condone this. You're supposed to only work this many hours, but we're not going to do a great deal about it. And it's literally taken, like physically, like people have reached exhaustion. It's taken the lives of 3 workers in the last like a couple of months. It's become a bit of a thing. But it's tech companies and these big companies that are like, well, no, it gives this massive advantage in the world, so we're going to sort of acknowledge it and really push for it. So it's baffling that this thing still exists. Well, not baffling, I suppose, but it does exist, this idea of push, push, push. But it was interesting to see that this ideal, this counter in Willoughby, and it made me think of more recently depictions of this. There's a show called Life on Mars. There was an American version made with Harvey Keitel in it, but I watched it. Didn't really like the American version. The British version stars Philip Glenister, and I forget the other guy's name. But it's this idea: the guy goes into a coma and gets sent back to 1973, and it's about sort of it's sort of the opposite of this because he goes back and has to deal with the brutality of 70s policing, but it's modern, this going back, and this idea of sort of sometimes things were better in the past and all this other stuff is interesting to me because it comes with rose-tinted glasses. And I can imagine if you did go back to Willoughby in 1888, is it something like that? He says
something like that. Yeah.
You're like, oh yeah, I'm sure you could go and sit down by the creek with these two lads fishing and all this other stuff. But then if you get polio, you're screwed. If you get a scratch, you're probably getting an infection. There was
Well, I mean, I wanted to return to the boss. I just absolutely believe that Rod Serling had some boss at the network who used the phrase push.
Yeah.
Like, you got to push, like, I know you're struggling with these deadlines. You're writing, 40 some episodes a year. You just got to push, Rod. I absolutely believe that.
Yeah.
And even though this is an advertising agency, all of his calls in that scene are about TV shows.
Yes.
And he seems to be making decisions about not just representing them, but about, more like a TV executive. So, I mean, I did make that connection. It does seem like there was something autobiographical for Rod Serling there. What you say about Willoughby is fascinating, and I think it goes back to that nostalgia and that sort of Americana. And I do connect it to, Walking Distance. But Walking Distance portrays that as a reality, right? A guy goes back in time and sees his own childhood. And it is idyllic. It is wonderful. Here, it's a fantasy. And I think that is more accurate. I mean, ultimately, would I want to go back to, my childhood in a small Midwestern town with a cornfield behind my house, and going to Kmart was our idea of fun? Hell no. Absolutely not. That sounds miserable. And the reality, there was a lake in which people fished, and I used to play around. It was terrible. And my friends, would have pushed me in the lake, and I would have pushed them in the lake for a laugh. I mean, there was none of this sort of it's a fantasy because those kids are so nice to him, and they're like, yeah, there's plenty of space and plenty of fish, and then strangers say, oh, Mr. Williams, good to have you here. I mean, there's this sort of, it's so over the top and stereotypical, and the reality is there's no air conditioning, it's hot. I mean, there are bugs all around that bandstand, and if you sit in that wonderful circular bandstand for more than 5 minutes, you're going to be driven crazy by the bugs in the summer. So yes, it's a fantasy of Americana. It's a fantasy of an earlier version, from 1888. But I think you're right that at least the show knows that, because at least you can rationalize the fantasy.
Yeah, I think what's interesting as well is the changing time that this shows, this fantasy world, this old version, let's say this old Americana, and it being this fantasy. If this was to be done today, and it has been done, I suppose, I say like with Life on Mars and other things, it would be the person gets taken back to this fantasy, this perfection, and they wouldn't believe it, and there'd be like some sinister undertone of like, well, who's actually running this perfect fantasy? Think like Westworld. We talked about with Westworld, this idea of like this representation of the fantasy and it having some ulterior motive. Like, you can't trust the perfection. The Matrix is a good example of that thing, and that's what I find that
Pleasantville.
Pleasant, yes. It's the Truman Show. This idea is like, there's always something behind the perfection, behind the utopia. So, in this case, it is a true fantasy, but it's interesting to see that this has got a weirdly optimistic yet tragic ending. He steps off the train and dies, but I'd like to think he's enjoying his time in Willoughby.
No, he's just dead.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, he keeps taking on his commute. He keeps having this recurring dream as he falls asleep of Willoughby, and it gets to the point where he says, "I'm going to get off." The train pulls away, and he doesn't get off. And the second time, and then he says, "Oh, the next time I'm going to get off, and I'm going to," So he does. But then you cut to, apparently he has, like, in his sleep, jumped off the train thinking he's in his dream, and he's at the end of a crevasse, basically, dead in the snow. And the one thing I don't think really makes a lot of sense is that the back of the hearse says Willoughby and Son. It's sort of, oh, that's clever, but it's not like he saw that and that's why he called it Willoughby. It's not like that hearse keeps, people keep dying on this train and he's made some mental connection. I mean, I guess it's possible what you're sort of suggesting, that Willoughby is real and he's escaped into some fairyland. I think he's just dead.
Yeah. Depends how you take it. Okay. Interesting. Because you can, that is definitely a way to take it. See, if you wanted to do that, like you say about because I noticed the hearse, and again, if you wanted to sort of take it the other way and have the usual suspects kind of reveal, I'd want them to reveal that, like, the seats were made by Willoughby and Son, and he had the word Willoughby in front of him constantly. Or the blind he kept pulling down had was made by Willoughby and Sons, or Willoughby and whatever, Willoughby Co. That would be more interesting, that he just kept seeing this name. Because I say that that would have been better than the funeral, the coroner or whatever. So. Okay, yeah. I like I do like, kind of like, you've taken the sort of like the more permanent and cynical ending, but
that might say more about me.
Yeah, but yeah, we'll see. Maybe one day we'll all reach Willoughby, find our own personal Willoughby.
Yeah, we'll spend 1 hour there and be done with it.
Yeah.
Boy, I really miss the rat race. There's got to be some middle ground here.
Well, again, like you say, this is this one episode away from a nice place to visit. Mm-hmm. Does he get to Willoughby and then realise that it's all perfection and it gets boring? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think it would. But again, it comes back to character, and it was a criminal who is a cardboard character. Here, the wife is a cardboard character, but Garth Williams is also sort of cardboard in the sense that he wants to slow down. He wants to he does not have ambition. Really? Like, you don't want to read or do something, or I don't know. I mean, you can imagine this guy might be happy in Willoughby. I sympathize with him, but I would probably be less happy.
It's that thing of taking a week off, isn't it? And saying, right, I'm going to just disengage for a week, and then I can sort of go back in. But fraternity sounds like quite a long time of sitting around fishing. I hate fishing. Anyway, any final thoughts?
Yeah, fishing is cruel.
Oh, yeah, cruel. Oh, it sucks. Also, it's boring as anything, is where I was going. But yes. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us, and we shall see you on the next episode.